Hey guys, this is another Resolute TV special. This Uncut is with Taxation is Behrman, one of our very first big guests on the show. He is a candidate for the US presidential election, so this will be extremely exciting. So watch the whole thing, Uncut, Daniel Behrman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Resolute TV. We're in the early stages of this program and we're really excited to have a 2020 presidential candidate from America. So he's going up against the Donald and Mr. Biden, I believe now.
Yep.
We have Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman. He's a very interesting guy, Libertarian, obviously, from his slogan. He's the guy, if you're watching the US elections and the US primaries and all the other media around, he's the guy who often wears the big yellow hat, and it's really cool and gets everybody's attention. So thanks for coming on, Dan. It's really exciting to have you. How's it all going? Who are you? And tell the audience who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman. I like to say that I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I got to Texas as fast as I could, and I identify as a Texan. And I'm running my campaign for president of the United States from down here in sunny Mexico. So
fantastic.
Yeah. So this campaign's really all about freedom and understanding that a lot of the problems that we have in our society and in our lives are created by government. We're overtaxed, we're overregulated, we're not that free. As much as governments like to tell us they're the reason that we're free, they're not. They're the reason that we have less freedom than we would have without them. And so really to get the idea across here is, you know, if the government would stop taxing us so much and regulating us so much, we'd actually be a lot more prosperous in our lives. And it's really starting to show right now when the government came in and, you know, because of the coronavirus around the world, they're shutting entire economies down, and people are really worried about how they're going to pay their rent. Well, this entire situation has been created by government because we don't own land because of property taxes. We don't own homes because of usually government endorsed programs for the banks that put us into, you know, 30-year debt for buying a home. All these other government problems that are, you know, they're created by government programs. They say they're going to solve a problem, but they actually make things worse. So that's really what we're bringing attention to.
Sorry, are you there?
Yep.
Hello.
Oh, can you hear me?
So sorry, Dan, before we got interrupted, mate. So the government's a bit responsible for all this. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, so most of the problems that we have in our lives are all created by government. Right now they've shut down the entire economy in a lot of places, and a lot of people are struggling to figure out how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to feed themselves. And if it weren't for these government programs, we wouldn't have these enormous debts. In the United States, it's most people, when they buy a house, it's debt. And that means they have to worry about how to pay the mortgage. If they've paid the mortgage off, now they have to worry about how they're going to pay the property tax. And if they can't afford to get in here at all, because these programs that, you know, the government backs the banks so that they make a lot bigger loans, it increases the values of the houses or the prices of the houses. It makes it much more difficult for people to get into those houses in the first place. And so a lot of people can't buy their own homes, and a lot of people just rent. 87% of the country is in debt. And because of that, everyone is living on basically month to month, paycheck to paycheck. And this is a government created problem, and it's created through a system of overtaxation. So if we eliminate this, we put people back we put their lives back on a solid foundation where they're able to have their lives. And if they lose their job for whatever reason, for an extended period of time, it's not that big of an impact on their lives. And we really need to understand that, because while this virus thing might not happen every year, might not happen every decade or every century, there are always natural disasters, car accidents that might prevent you from working, or just an illness or a death in the family, whatever it is. Nobody should be in that much debt that you can't take that much time off of work, because that really puts us into a system that's like slavery. We're worried about working, and not worried about taking care of our own families, our own health, and just spending time enjoying life. This is all a government problem. So eliminating a lot of these programs that they have is going to fix a lot of this.
100%. I sort of agree with you. So who are you? How did you end up, one, getting the kahunas to run for the United States presidency, Because let's be fair, the average Joe doesn't think to themselves, let's go and do it. I sort of did something a little bit similar over here in Australia, and I sort of ran in the federal elections as well, because I don't mind stirring the pot. But what made you do it? What made Dan Behrman sort of, have a crack at this sort of thing? And, what was your background as a kid? Did you grow up being a libertarian, I really don't like government very much, or did you grow up sort of and develop along the way? How did this all come about?
Right. So I was actually, I grew up in California, which is very left, very kind of socialist or Democrat. It's a blue state. And so being around all that, I was always concerned with social issues. And I was always, why doesn't the government just print a bunch of money and take care of the homeless and feed everybody who's starving and everything else? That was just kind of the mentality, because these were the problems that I was faced with when I was young. And, of course, not knowing how politics or economics works, those are the quick solutions that you jump to. And really, we see a lot of people who are pushing for those same solutions in the real world, which is kind of scary. But from that point, I wanted to build a business, because I didn't want to spend my life in a place of poverty. I wanted to be able to build something for myself, so I wouldn't be worried about making money for the rest of my life. So I became an entrepreneur. I tried starting businesses. I did so many different things. And of course, the government was always there telling me, well, you need a permit for this, you need a license, you need to pay taxes and all these other things. And, when it gets personal like that, you sit there and wonder, like, why should I pay you taxes for this? What are you contributing to my business that I should have to pay taxes?
I'm working my ass off.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people
you're taking a cut. The business partner nobody wants.
Yeah. And so, they want to claim ownership of your business. Like Obama said, you didn't make that, we made that. It's this idea that all of society helped to build the business. Yeah, they did. But when I build my business, the way I repay that to society is my business purchases goods and services from other businesses. We hire employees who work for us and we exchange money with them. That's how we repay society. We pay for the things that we need to actually use. We don't just give money to these politicians who are going to go recklessly spend it trying to invade other countries and pay off subsidies to their friends' businesses and billions of dollars into these corporations. That's not what we do. That's not how we repay it to society. And it's not repaying it to society. It's just, that's the illusion that the politicians have created for us. So I started really getting into this. I started fighting the IRS, and the taxes and everything else. And then I started learning about how the system actually works. And I noticed that really a lot of this is made through empty threats. They have, they'll enforce laws. It's kind of like if a bully comes up to you and says, give me your lunch money. You don't have to give him your lunch money, right? There's no law that says you have to. But of course, if he says, well, that's the law.
I'm bigger than you and meaner than you. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you're gonna cave in and say, oh, well, he says that's the law. And that's exactly what the government does a lot of times. They actually lie about what the law is. They send enforcers out that violate the Constitution and violate your rights. And this happens all the time, but they're intimidating you into complying with things that you don't have to comply with. And once I realized this, and I stopped complying, I started, just a full-on retreat from government. I got rid of my driver's license, my vehicle registrations, everything else. And I decided I wanted as little participation with government as possible. And in doing so, I realized how little power they actually have to enforce a lot of these things. And then I started talking about it to other people, and just the way that other people lit up, understanding that this idea of freedom means we shouldn't have these bullies that work for the government that run around telling us how to live our lives. People just lit up, and they responded so well to this message that I continued to spread it. And this message has actually spread all over the world. Of course, in Australia, people all over Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America they're really tuning into this message, and they're really supporting it. So it seemed, because the federal government is the basis for a lot of the problems, like a lot of the major problems in the United States, I figured that's where I could attack and say, these are the programs that we need to get rid of. And so it just kind of became obvious that running for president would be a great way to do that. Getting into politics is something I never wanted to do. I used to like movies, making them, watching them, video games and computers, playing them, programming them, and these sorts of things. I'm kind of a technology nerd. And I never thought I would be getting into politics, but after a certain point, it's like you recognize that this has to be stopped, and nobody else is going to do it, because the people who are actually politicians and lawyers and these other things, they're fighting against us, every single one of them. We don't have somebody who's fighting for us, and so if that has to be me, that has to be me. So I got up and did it.
Congratulations. I think it's fantastic. And I sort of feel a bit the same way. I'm a chef by trade. I've had little entrepreneurial outputs and things like that. I didn't sit there and go, I'd really like to be involved in the political sphere, but I just watch everybody just happily, well, not even happily. Sometimes it's just out of pure fear, towing the line.
Right.
We have to do this because, well, that's just how it is. And I've always questioned that. I always found that a bit off-putting. I sort of liken it to if the mafia was in charge. At least that'd be fun while they take all of our money and scare the piss out of everybody. They have good parties, I hear.
What's that?
Look. Oh. Sorry. So look, I guess there's a couple of key questions. Now, I'm going to ask your thoughts on Donald Trump, because you're obviously ballsy enough to run against the guy. I think he's a lot of fun. I don't agree with all of his policies, but I personally prefer him over the alternative that was sort of put forward, and I think that'll probably stay the same. Obviously, unless you manage to get up, but based on the big two, I kind of find him a lot of fun, and I kind of find him interesting. And to be fair, he does have that business background, which means in a lot of ways he's more practical than some of the guys who have just been career politicians. How do you find him? I mean, have you interacted with him? Have you told him you're going to kick his ass for taking too much tax? Where's all that at?
Yeah, I have told him plenty. Unfortunately, Twitter's the only place I've got a direct contact with him. He's not going to pick up my phone call. But he is really interesting. As if you look at him as a comedian or an entertainer, absolutely, he's very funny to watch. And he does do a lot of things where he's pushing back against the system. But what I saw, and this happened from when he was even running in the primaries with the Republican Party, was he mentioned how much money he gave to all these other people who were running. And so while he might not have that history of being the politician, he has the history of being the guy who bribes the politician. So, he's not innocent from all of this corrupt politics like a lot of people think he is. And he has done some really good things. He's done some really bad things. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, he's really interested in himself. So if he does something that's good for the economy, that's a good thing. But what's his rationale behind that? He's thinking selfishly. He's thinking about himself. What's good for me? And that's potentially very dangerous. One thing that we see is the economy's been doing great. And it's, one reason is that he's cut some taxes and, he's done some other things, but he's at the same time, he's also started a trade war. And, while the economy was doing good and the stock market was going up, that's not really a great indicator that America's in a good place, because as we see now, coronavirus came in, and nobody could have predicted it, but it came in, and because of this, we've had to shut down the entire economy, which is not the best thing to do in my mind. But we've had to shut down the entire economy, and now we realize that even though the stock market was doing so well, and maybe unemployment was so low, we're still at this point where if something really big happens, whether it's a natural disaster or whatever it is, and an entire city or an entire state or an entire country has to stop working, we're in this position where people can't survive. We never had our own nest egg. We never had ownership of our own property, and so that's not a concern for the Donald. That's for him, it's no. Let's make the stock market go up. Why? Because he owns lots of stocks. And that's good for him. That's good for business. So, and then he started, of course, the trade war with China, which, it makes him look good politically. It helps create more jobs here in the US, but it also makes things more expensive. And it's simply put, it's not ethical. You're ultimately threatening force against one person from doing business with another person because you want to give one other person an unfair advantage, which, you know, a lot of people will cheer on through patriotism. But ultimately, like, that's not something we should do. We would be absolutely up in arms if they did that between states or between individuals in the country. And actually, there is a lot of that going on with you know, the way that we have all these regulations that protect monopolies. If you want to talk about that, well, why hasn't he broken up all the big monopolies? Which, you know, it doesn't take the government to come in and say, we're going to separate you into two separate businesses. All it takes is the government to say, we're going to get out of the way for anybody who wants to compete with you. We're not going to be so hard on them as far as regulations and requirements to get started up, which is why those things are there in the first place, to protect those monopolies. So like I said, he's done a few good things, but I think it's absolutely coincidental to, you know, what is in his self-interest. Yeah,
it does seem to line up quite a lot. But in saying that, I suppose when you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders from your perspective and your catchphrase and philosophy, which I subscribe to be fair, does Bernie absolutely scare the pants off you relative to how he would like to move forward?
Well, it's interesting, and I don't know if you saw the news yet, but Bernie Sanders just dropped out today.
I saw it this morning. I was watching it when I first was sort of setting this all up. I was watching the news, and I sort of thought, it's as much as it's, from my perspective, obviously we're in a different country, and I kind of go, yeah, Bernie's terrifying. Obviously, you live there, or you know, you're in that system. I've always seen Australia as like a little brother, sort of, to America in a lot of ways, where we're usually a few years behind. We have a lot of similarities, but we have some dissimilarities as well. And I everything I've seen about Bernie and AOC and all those guys just terrifies me. Terrifies me.
It is terrifying to one degree. To another degree, I think there's I see some really great opportunity, especially now that Bernie's dropped out. It's a great opportunity to come in and get a lot of his supporters to support our mission. And you know, one of the things that Bernie's really great at identifying a problem. He's just not that great at coming up with a solution. So, for example, our healthcare system is absolutely ridiculous. It makes healthcare so expensive that nobody can afford it. And what Bernie is trying to do is say, okay, you know, this isn't fair. This is a system that was created by billionaires and corporations and corrupt politicians, which is all true. But his solution is, of course, socialism. My solution is, no, let's get rid of the corruption and everything else that created this system. And in order to really do that, you just have to have a better understanding of what was actually put in place to bring us to where we are. And in doing so, and in talking to you know, the people who support Bernie's campaign, because they're recognize that you've got two classes of people. You've got the politicians and the people who are supporting them, right? The people who support Bernie, they're not necessarily pro-socialism. They're pro-fixing the healthcare system. And he's the only one who's out there saying we have a solution. And then, of course, I'm out there saying, well, I have a solution too. It's just that I don't have a huge party to back me up with that. And, of course, the reason for that is my plan, my solution is not going to make people rich. And so those rich people who own that party are not going to back me or support me in any way. And so, but there is really a great opportunity here, because I can take this solution. And in fact, we have taken this solution and we've given it to Bernie Sanders supporters. And they've even while Bernie was running, they said, yeah, you know what, that sounds like a better plan. Because we can always point out how the socialist system has failed throughout history, which, that doesn't really fly well, because you're just telling people, no, you can't have that. But when you offer a better solution in response to that, then people actually really get interested in that. And especially to show that my solution actually fixes two problems. Bernie's solution fixes one problem. It says, okay, we're going to make a bunch more people pay into this system, so anyone who can't afford healthcare can now get it. That fixes one problem. It doesn't fix the problem of the billionaires, because, of course, when you have more people paying into a system, if you don't fix the system itself, you just have the system that's going to say, well, we're going to raise our prices because we know the government's going to have to pay no matter what. And then they're going to be taking on more money, and the rich are going to get richer. Under my system, you get rid of monopolies, you get rid of all this extra bureaucracy. So you lower the prices naturally through a fair market. and the billionaires are no longer making their massive profits. They're going to make a little bit of profit. They're going to make enough to incentivize their businesses to grow, but there's also going to be more businesses. There's going to be more hospitals. There's going to be more doctors. There's going to be more medicines available, and the cost of everything is going to be so low that anybody even earning minimum wage is going to be able to afford all the healthcare that they could possibly need.
And of course, it's arguable that as the competition increases, the quality of service will increase because they're going to have to do a better job.
Absolutely.
That seems like a fairly standard. Australia has a brilliant medical system. I mean, really, on a world scale, our Medicare system is really good, which is funny because anybody who saw my election stuff will go, well, you were criticising the government supporting. My criticism often came in from, you can't opt in or out. We had a bit of a program came in that we had to opt out of. We didn't get the choice to opt in. We were just automatically put on this list, and then we had to, if we knew about it, opt out, which I took great exception to. And the other thing that I took a lot of exception to is what our politicians are now doing is saying, well, everybody's foregoing private health insurance because our government system is actually quite good. Well, the insurance industry will collapse if we don't support it. So we're going to raise your personal taxes if you don't have private health cover.
Oh, wow.
Well, they're not.
Both.
But they're stinging us on both sides. And most people aren't seeing it because they go, but we've got this really great health system. Oh, but I've got private. And if you talk to most people on private, now there's exceptions to every rule, of course. Some people go, no, my private health cover was an absolute savior. And that's great. Well done, no problem. But it's the opting in and opting out. And, we've got to save the insurance companies. So we need more Australians to go and get their private health cover. So if you don't, I can't remember the age group it is, but if you're in a certain age group and you haven't gone and got yourself private health insurance, you creep up into a tax bracket where they charge you more to cover your Medicare because you're not going to go through the other side. And it's sort of like, well, it's a sly way of forcing people to participate in two industries. You're supporting the government and the insurance companies, which I sort of take a little bit of issue in regard to. But other than that, all right, the next interesting person I'll ask you about, Tulsi Gabbard. She's almost a centrist. You know, I've seen libertarians over here and in the States because I'm on all the groups and things. Now, she seems to attract a great crowd. She seems to have managed to piss off enough Democrats to not get a Guernsey anywhere. But she also sort of appeals to that you know, the centrist Republican as well. What's your take on her? She seems pretty interesting.
Yeah, she's said a lot of interesting things. She's a difficult one to talk about. I think, I think she has called out some other people on their policies. She has raised some interesting issues. I think ultimately she's still for a big government solving a lot of the problems instead of allowing people to solve our own problems, which, it's still interesting because she's a lot of people have said she's kind of libertarian, which, is great if she is a little bit. But I think, that's wonderful. And if she got elected, she would be so much better than a lot of other options that are out there. But at the same time, it's, as much as you can praise someone for having a little bit of libertarian tendency, we have to say, okay, let's get you over the line. Let's turn you into a full-blown libertarian. Because she does still support a lot of the big government things, the military. She's of course a big supporter of that. And so that's going to be a little bit more difficult for her because she did participate with the military for a while. But at the same time, we have a lot of veterans who have become libertarians and have joined in supporting my campaign and other libertarian campaigns. So, it's not unrealistic to think that in the future we could get her to be a little bit more libertarian. I really can't say anything terrible about her. I don't think she's running around. I don't think she has, a whole lot of terrible ideas that are going to hurt, a lot of people other than just government in general. And I don't think she has any bad intentions or selfish intentions like a lot of the other people running. So that's really a huge plus for her. Like we did see the Democrat Party, like I was saying, I could solve the healthcare problem, but if I took my solution into a bigger party like the Democrats, they'd absolutely push me away because I'd be taking money out of their billionaires' pockets. Not through stealing, which is how they get money from us, but by protecting fair competition and allowing people a little bit of freedom in their own decisions. So, you know, that's that type of thing they don't like in there. That's one of the reasons they've pushed her out, I'm sure, is because they recognize to some degree there are a lot of businesses and billionaires that she's going to hurt if she implemented some of her policies.
Yeah, no doubt. I do get the feeling watching her that she comes from a genuine place, whereas some of the others that you watch, you know, you're sort of just thinking, oh, you're a pure politician. And there is the old statement that if you go through life thinking you want to be a politician for the sake of being a politician, you shouldn't be anywhere near politics. You know, if you're there to solve a problem, if you're there to, you know, do something productive and proactive, great, jump into politics. But these people who want to make a career out of it scare the pants off me. Now, I don't know if you know anything about our libertarian movement in Australia at all. It's certainly not as big, but I think statistically we compare quite well. I'm a member of a political party called the Liberal Democrats, and we had a federal senator for 5 or 6 years over here, which was a pretty big deal. He was our first elected senator, and currently in the current climate, he's no longer a sitting member, but he's also participating in this program. We also have 2 what are called MLCs in Victoria. So they're down there doing a good job, which Victoria is probably the closest thing to a socialist republic in Australia. And over in Western Australia, we've got a young bloke named Aaron Stonehouse, who's also an MLC. So we've actually got 3 Libertarian elected officials in our system. So we're really proud of them, and they're doing a great job. And we've got quite a few that are running for council, like local councils and things like that. So it's a growing movement over here. So we're a bit excited about it, and hopefully we can develop and grow it. And I'll sort of, with this program, hopefully give a little bit of air to some libertarian philosophies. So what's your thoughts, Dan, on obviously gun control? Big issue. Lots of people for, against. I've always been a little bit, again, on the fence with gun control and legalizing of marijuana and other drugs, sort of thing. I've always been, like, is it really that big of an issue? Does it really matter? But I've always been the tax, the pro-business, the get government out of your bedroom and your life. It's nothing to do with them. Where do you sit on those couple of issues?
Yeah, so gun control, I like to say, requires 2 hands. It is a very divided issue here in the U.S. And I know Australia's, you've got a full gun ban at this point, right?
What we had was in, I think it was 96. We had a guy, and look, even the validity of this crime is still questioned in many circles about how legitimate it was. But a guy in one of our little states called Tasmania went on a shooting rampage. The general government story was, this guy's a nutter. He's gone around with an automatic weapon and murdered a heap of people. We need to ban all guns. All guns, just lock them up, shut the door. So they had a gun amnesty. Our Conservative Prime Minister at the time, he enacted all the gun bans. People still, farmers can still get guns with the right permits, and there are sporting shooters who, in a lot of ways, are still very much demonized, and there are a lot of restrictions. As I said, that's not my bugbear issue, but there's unlike you guys where it's, you've got conceal and carry, and you've got an awful lot of things like that. There is a big gun culture in America that Australia just doesn't have, and in around that 96 buyback scheme, we've essentially got a disarmed population. The citizenry just there is no gun. No, there's no major gun culture over here at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. You get to a point in society where you have relatively low crime, and of course, right now we have the lowest crime that we've had in the entire world. And it's hard for people to see that because once you see a crime happen, it's everybody always says, "Oh my God, things are getting so terrible these days." When actually crime has been improving for I think the last 20 or 30 years.
Per capita, yeah.
Yeah. And so, what's interesting about this is, what is crime and where does it come from? Now, a lot of this comes from like domestic disputes, people fighting with their wives and that sort of thing. But there's also a lot that comes from fighting over resources, whether it's, somebody needs to steal in order to feed themselves because they just can't get a job, or whatever has made that difficult. And a lot of this comes, going back full circle to, problems created by government. They create these taxes, which mean, we can't pay our rent, we can't afford food, and all these other things, which make resources more scarce, which mean people are going to fight over them. You don't see people breaking into each other's houses when they live in rich neighborhoods. You see poor people who don't have much breaking into other houses, whether they'll break into poor houses or rich houses. But it's fighting over resources is really what it is. And, if the government wasn't taking away from people, there'd be a lot less of that. So we have to understand that government is actually incentivizing a lot of crimes to happen. When we talk about these actual crimes, it has nothing to do with the guns. People think the more guns there are, the more crimes there are going to be. But the truth is, if you take away all the guns, people are going to do their same crimes with knives. It's really, statistically, none of that matters. What really matters is that, people are able to defend themselves, because, you have a lot of people for so many different reasons saying you could never use it. You should never need a gun. But what happens if you get attacked by somebody? You should be able to defend yourself by whatever means necessary. And, some people will say, well, why don't you just fight like a man and use your fists? Well, what if you're in a wheelchair? What if you're disabled? What if you're very small and your attacker is 3 or 4 times your size? There's so many different scenarios where that just doesn't play out. And so while we like to fantasize in our head, we could just get rid of all the guns and it would solve so many problems. That's simply not realistic. What happens often is you get rid of the guns and you get more violence because people are, afraid. What's actually interesting about what's going on right now is our crime rates are down. Of course, because everybody's locked in over this coronavirus thing. And if you think about it, it's literally because people are afraid of each other. They're not afraid they're going to get shot if they rob somebody. They're afraid they're going to get some illness that's going to kill them. And really, that is the same. That fear is keeping people, it's keeping people from committing crimes. And, well, should people be afraid? And that's the only reason they shouldn't commit crimes? Well, isn't that what the government is? Doesn't the government come in and say, if you steal, we're going to give you 10 years in jail. If you kill someone, we're going to give you the death penalty. Isn't that really just putting fear in someone's mind to prevent them from committing a crime? So if you were to arm all of the people and everybody was able to defend themselves, wouldn't that same fear be just as rational and apply just as much? And we've seen in so many cases, there was a small town, I think in Georgia, where and not that I like the use of making this mandatory, but they mandated that that every person in the county get a concealed carry license. And after they did that, the crime rate plummeted. And one of the reasons that they did this was I think they were having a high rate of rape incidences. And and that just dropped off. So now it's not even about, somebody's going to attack you with a gun and you need another gun to defend it. It's about, no, somebody's committing a violent crime against somebody. They're usually bigger than the person is not able to defend themselves. But if they don't even have a gun, if they just have the threat of, hey, somebody wants to go rape that woman. Well, there's a possibility I might get shot. Maybe I don't want to do that. So there's so many different ways. That it's good to have that right.
Funnily enough, our former federal senator who's coming on as a guest of the show, one of the exclusives, which is okay because I'm going to air your segment after his, one of the exclusives that he's announced is he's actually just releasing a book completely on guns and firearms and statistics and controls and all those sort of things. Right. And he read a few of them out to me, and they were just unbelievable statistics. And as he said, it's all about the numbers, not the perceived numbers. And he's 100% on the money in that area. His name's David Lionhelm. If you ever want to have a squiz at what he achieved, he did a lot of really good positive things. And when his book comes out, I'm hoping to sort of give him a bit of a promotion. But he touches on the United States gun laws and the Malaysian gun laws, and it sounds like he's put a lot of comprehensive effort into it because it is one of his passions, to be fair. So, all right, Dan, based on that, how do you feel about the marijuana, the legalizing of drugs? I've always found it to be a secondary libertarian issue. I always found if you tackle the tax and the actual social issues first, then the recreational and the more issues like marijuana and drug management, all those sort of things, I always put them as a secondary type category. I've always broken libertarianism down into categories. How do you feel about it, and how would you tackle it? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I actually I have this platform that's legalizing pineapple pizza, And really, that's just a metaphor for the drug war. Because ultimately, you know, I may not agree with what you put on your pizza, but I will defend to the death your right to eat it. And, you know, if somebody's taking drugs and they're not harming anybody else or not bothering anybody else, what does it bother me? You know, there's so much alcohol around the world, and alcohol is so much more destructive to your own body than cannabis, and yet that's considered perfectly okay. So is it, you know, what is this really about? Now, there's a lot of propaganda that's made us believe that cannabis is really bad, but even if it was, what's the difference? Because I also advocate legalization of heroin and cocaine and anything else. And the reason for this, there's so many different reasons. One is, you know, if somebody wants to do that to themselves, why are you stealing money from me to take them and lock them up in a cage? So, and then forcing me to spend money to feed them for, you know, however many years, when this is something that they wanted to do to themselves. Why are we paying to save somebody who doesn't want to be saved? It makes absolutely no sense. We've spent in the US, we've spent over $1 trillion on this drug war so far. And of course, we already have a massive spending problem. That's just another one of them. But what's worse is, you know, you have a lot of people who go through phases in life. They go through depression and other things. And of course, a lot of that is created by government programs. I'll go back to that. When you tax people out of their, you tax people into poverty, they become homeless and depressed. They're depressed about, you know, I can't enjoy my life because I'm working 2 jobs and I have absolutely nothing left. That creates depression and anxiety and all these other problems that you know, create an opportunity for somebody to turn to drugs. And so you know, you can look at, okay, this might be temporary. They might be able to pull through this. They might go through a phase where they do some drugs. Maybe they're high school kids and they hang out with the wrong crowd. And you know, they get into, some bad drugs, but it's just a phase, and it's something that they grow out of in, you know, maybe 2 to 5 years. Let them grow out of it. Let them get on with their lives. Instead, what this system does is it says, oh, well, let's see, you're 18 or maybe younger now, and we're going to charge you as an adult, and we're going to put you in prison because you were found in possession of this drug. This is a felony. It doesn't matter whether or not you were stealing from people, assaulting people, doing anything. All that matters is that you were simply in possession. It might not have even been yours. We're going to put you in jail for a certain number of years. We're going to take time out of your life that you would normally be spending learning and developing yourself. Even if you were on drugs during that period, you're still learning and developing. We're going to take that away from you, and we're going to give you a criminal record. So once you get out of here, you're not going to be able to get a job. You're going to be too old.
Become limited.
What's that?
Your options become very limited when you're tarnished in that way.
Exactly. You're older, so it's more likely that your opportunity of staying at home for whatever time is lower now. So getting back into school is going to be harder, and it just creates a cycle. So now you have no job, no source of income, no great way to get education. You might not get accepted for you might have been really smart. You might have been doing really well in school, but you got caught with a joint, and now you don't have access to a college grant. So there's so many different ways this can hurt you and destroy your future. And then we blame the drug when it's the effects of the prohibition that have created all the real destruction to that person's life. So there's really a lot of different ways to look at it. And I know there's a lot of people who just enjoy using it. If they're not harming anybody, let them. There's a lot of people who think there are medical benefits. Some of them have been proven. Some are less proven. But that's your right to use medicine, whether it's proven or not. Some people think just vitamin C is going to improve your immune system, and whether or not that's proven, that's your right to do that if that's what you believe is going to work for you. Even going there, a lot of medical research firms, whether they're private firms or whether they're universities, they're not able to research cannabis because it's still illegal. And now we're hearing that LSD and psilocybin mushrooms are actually helping to treat PTSD and a bunch of other psychological disorders, mental disorders. We can't do the research if they're so illegal that it's illegal just to do research on them. We can't. So what are we actually doing? We're preventing access to these things. And yes, it's absolutely a tragedy when somebody, takes too many drugs, they completely destroy their life, they overdose, they kill themselves, whatever the case may be. That's absolutely tragic. But how much destruction are we doing to the good of society by taking that right away from somebody else?
Yeah. So I suppose in the way you're putting that, you'd prefer to move it across as a medical issue than a criminal issue, at the very least. Is that sort of?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. So I guess if that's kind of a difficult one, but I guess, if somebody has an addiction, yeah, that should be treated as a medical issue. They should be able to get help. They should be able to find a rehabilitation or something. I still don't think that should be mandatory. That's maybe something that should be within the family or something, unless somebody's actually out there. I mean, this is the thing. If somebody's out there actually committing crimes, then arrest them for the crime and charge them with the crime. But you don't need to do that with drug use. I had a conversation with a sheriff in Texas who was, we got into a discussion about this, and he was telling me about, somebody who's addicted to meth who just got arrested for the third time for breaking into somebody's house. And he was breaking into the house so he could steal money so he could buy more meth. And I said, okay, so what did you arrest him for? Did you arrest him for possession of meth? No, he didn't have any meth on him. So we arrested him for breaking into the house. And I'm like, okay, so, and then you charged him for breaking into the house, right? And he's like, yeah, we charged him for breaking and entering. And how much time did he get? He's getting 10 years. Okay. So what does meth have to do with any of this? He's broken into his house. He got arrested for it. He's getting charged for it. He's getting 10 years in prison. What if he was breaking into that house to steal money so that he could buy a new video game? Should we ban video games?
Well, that's arguable from some politicians as well, that we should be banning video games. But I mean, a lot of this comes down to the libertarian philosophy of the no harm principle, which many of us sort of subscribe to, I guess, and that's why it's so valuable to ask and discuss the concept. I've got a bit of a theory that no victim, there is no crime. People go, well, what about if somebody maybe does something? And so you can't charge people on the theory that they may one day do some harm if they haven't actually done any yet. That's you can't arrest people for wrong think or even doing something wrong if they only hurting themselves. Which
I mean, because if you want to go that way, then you should arrest every single person around the world, because every single person is capable of saying, "Hey, I want to steal something." Everybody can potentially do that.
I want to hurt, or I want to commit violence, or I want to do it. Exactly right. And
they have the weapons.
It's just madness, and you see these guys at the moment with this lockdown from all the viruses. We had a girl down in one of the states who went for a driving lesson with her mother the other day. So the mother she lives with, so she's in isolation with her mother. They hopped in their car and they went and thought, well, we'll make the most of this time. We'll go driving lessons. So some of our local law enforcement, I'm sure they're lovely people, pulled up, had the girl, I think it was a $1,600 fine for breaking social distancing or whatever it is. And it's like, no, we're in the same social circle that we would be anyway. We're not hurting anybody. We know we're not in our house, but who are we affecting? And then there was also a guy yesterday, and there's more and more of these cases week on week that are happening over here at the moment, because our police state's starting to test its muscles and flex its boundaries. And we've been told that we're allowed to go out and exercise. So one guy jumped in his car, took his mountain bike out to a mountain bike trail and was pulled up on his own in a mountain bike trail in the middle of the bush. And he received a $600-700 fine for being out on his own and possibly contaminating someone. It's like, what is wrong with you people? I think it's fairly insidious, the whole thing, but what can we do? So, all right, Dan. Next libertarian or interesting topic. How do you feel about? Have you got any philosophies or any theories on the family law system? Obviously, the American and the Australian one's different, but they're a big topic issue. Taxation, family law, things like that. In my head, are the key issues that affect most of society. How do you feel about family law relative to America, of course, and we'll just translate it over here. Do you have a stance?
Yeah, a lot of it needs to be reformed. We've got government incentivizing really bad systems. So we've got in some states, they incentivize the child protective services by how many children they take away from their families. So now basically, if I'm working for CPS, if I can take 10 children away from a family or from various families, I'm going to get a big bonus check. And it doesn't matter what the reason was to take them away. All that matters is that I take them away. That's an incentive. And so what we see because of that is we see absolutely obnoxious reasons for people to take their children away. One is coronavirus. We see people, oh, you have a certain job, you're helping society, but you're putting yourself at risk for coronavirus. We're going to take your children away. Some parents smoke cannabis, or there's a rumor that they're smoking cannabis and not even any actual proof. They'll come and take the children away. Adults don't want to, they don't want their kids to go to a certain public school. And, they say, hey, we don't agree with this. And we have a public school system where we actually had one of my supporters is a teenager who's in high school. And they were imposing laws on him that did not exist. And when we confronted the school about it, they said, well, we make our own laws here. And, even though we showed them a law that says they have absolutely no authority for it, they insisted that they had the right to create their own laws. So this mother wanted to take her son out of public school. And of course, that can create problems, and they can use that for a reason to take him away. There are so many different problems that are incentivized. When you get into the child support system, so you have a divorce. Of course, when there's a child, things get really difficult, and people want to fight over this. And it's a tough situation. There's no easy solution to any of that. But the problem is when the government comes in and says, oh, well, they say to the judge, if you separate these people and you force this person to pay, $10,000 in child support over the next year, we're going to give your state an additional $10,000 for your budget. Now the judges are incentivized. Hey, we're going to impose as much child support, even if it's completely unreasonable, even if we know the father can't pay it, we're going to impose as much as we possibly can because we're going to get the money from the federal government. There are all these programs in place, and all they do is they create this division. You actually have laws in place that incentivize divorce. You have subsidies for women who are divorced, who have kids. The more kids they have, there's a program, a welfare program, where women can receive money for every kid that they have, but not if the father lives in the home. So that's incentive for them to kick the father out. And you take all their money away from child support, and they're looking for, okay, how can I make some more money? And some of them turn to side hustles, selling drugs, whatever it might be, to get some more money. And of course, that ends up getting them in prison. And it's just another problem that's created by government that has set this series of dominoes in place that are just absolutely destroying families. So we absolutely do need some reform.
Yeah, for sure. It feeds into a negative cycle, clearly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so you touched on education, and since we're going all in and we're gonna sort of tackle the big issues, how would you see the education system being reformed in your way of doing it? I sort of have my own thoughts, but what are yours relative to a way to improve the quality of the education of our children? We worked out, I think last year they did a heap of testing on Australian kids, and we were about 4 years behind at primary school level than say Singapore's children. Which I found appalling, considering how much our government manages and tips into these programs. What are your thoughts on the American version of, and how would you tackle it, and how would you improve it?
Absolutely. So we have to understand that the reason our education system is so bad is because it's not designed to educate us. It was designed to make factory workers. And there's so many different arguments for this. One of the gentlemen that I'm running against, Arvin Vora, is actually he's an educator, and he's got so many things he could say about this. And that's the kind of person I'd like to put in charge of the education system. But of course, the Federal Department of Education needs to go, because this is trying to create a one-size-fits-all education program for the entire country. And not everybody thinks the same or works the same. So, you have programs like No Child Left Behind, which have basically made, instead of making the kids smarter, it has made the schools dumber to make sure that everybody passes. And, the reality is everybody's different. And it's, they try to divide people on these standardized tests and say these kids are smarter than these kids. And that might not even be the case. They might all be smart. It's just that they have different ways of learning, or they're interested in different things. I know when I was going through public school, I absolutely could not pay attention in my English literature classes, geography and history. I just was not interested in that. Science and math I did really well in, because that's what I was interested in. And that's of course why I became a computer nerd. But but like that's the thing. If you allow people to study what they're interested in, some people are really interested in medicine. Allow them to study medicine and chemistry and all these other things. And they might be really great at it, but just because they failed on like, English literature, whatever, because they were too bored to read the book, does not mean that you should fail them out of high school and not allow them to become a doctor. That's absolutely insane. So there's a lot of that. Competition is really important. And what I mean by that is we need to have different options. We need to have different options where you can say, okay, if my kid's not doing that well in this school, let's take them to a different school. Let's try homeschooling. And in fact, right now on this lockdown, everybody's essentially in homeschooling, and we're seeing that it actually does work. And a lot of parents are being forced to see, hey, if I stay home with my kids and I actually work with them and teach them, first of all, I'm actually going to know what they're learning, and I can have a little bit of control over that, because right now we send our kids to school, we don't know what they're learning. They come home, and it's not like they can repeat everything to us, and we don't know if they're being indoctrinated or brainwashed into praise the government, that kind of stuff, which is really what's going on.
Which I do suspect that does occur. Certainly it occurs over here in some capacity, and I suspect the same over there.
Absolutely. But to what degree? It's like, for a lot of people out here, it's like, yeah, we know it happens, but that's our only option. I know plenty of libertarians who send their kids to public school, and they try to re-educate their kids once they come home, but they're like, I can't do the homeschooling, I don't have the time. And of course, this is another government problem, because remember, back in 50 or 75 years ago, not everybody was in the workforce. There were a lot of stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home wives, that's what society was made out of. And at some point they said, okay, and I think this was like around World War II, they said, no, we need to improve our workforce. We need to get everybody into the factories, including the women. So it used to be that like half of the country was unemployed, and now we're worried about, it's 5% unemployment. That's unacceptable. It's not about letting people stay at home and living their free lives. It's about getting people into factories. And that's why, you look at the school system. I don't know how it is out there, but in the US, it's you go to school, you hear the bell, and when the bell rings, you get to class. And then when the bell rings, you get to leave the class and you get to go have lunch. That's exactly how a factory works. You hear the bell, you hear the whistle, whatever it is, start work, stop work, start work, stop work. And that's really what it is. It's absolutely insane. But that system was designed, and you go back to who actually put that in place. And it was the Rockefellers who came up with the Federal Department of Education, and they had so many factories. That's what this was. This was a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. It's absolutely obsolete. It's not there to make us smart. It's there to turn us into employees. And it doesn't teach us anything about survival. It doesn't teach us how to do our taxes. It doesn't teach us how to buy a house. It teaches us how to be good employees. And that's it.
How does the banking system work? How does interest on a credit card work? How's Afterpay work?
None of that.
How do you cook, clean, take care of yourself? It's amazing the stuff that
those are some of the classes. Those are some of the I guess when I was growing up, they were already starting to phase those classes out. How to repair your own car, how to the home economics, how to cook and all this other stuff. They started getting rid of those when I was in high school. And why? These are survival skills.
The life skills. Yeah, that's right. One of the other things I noticed certainly over here with our primary school. So when I went to primary school an eternity ago, the fencing around the schools, and I just noticed it because that's just one of the things I noticed, was I could, as a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, I could climb over the fence quite conceivably to get a ball or whatever we were doing as kids, and that was from the school. I drove past my old primary school the other day, and it looks like a prison. And it used to be a beautiful school, but now the fences are massively tall, and I don't know what the schools are like over there. I know a lot of the schools over here have become that way, and the argument is, it's to keep the children safe. To keep them in their safe zone. No, it's to keep them in a cage. I don't know if you're preparing them for jail, or you're just teaching them that it's okay to be locked into an environment, but that seems to be my take on it anyway. And I sort of think, you're just indoctrinating children to be good little battery chickens, or caged chickens.
Yeah. And whether or not the cage actually has that effect is it could be, because there are so many things that the government does with good intentions that are absolutely just destructive to our lives. So they might say, oh yeah, these kids are jumping the fence to get the ball. We need to figure out a way to keep them in. So they build a bigger cage. instead of saying, you know, maybe we don't have enough adults to supervise these children, which is like, it's like what, 30 to 1, or when they're on the playground, it's probably more like 100 or 200 to 1. And, you know, and it's like, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be sending our kids to these schools where they don't. We should keep them at home and educate them ourselves, one-on-one, or you know, it might be 2-on-1, or two adults to 5 children, whatever it is. That's how people should be educated, because when you're in school, you know, first of all, you have this emotional bonding connection with your parents and with your teachers, right? And if you're, you know, if the time your kids turn 3 or 4 years old and you send them off to public school, they've only spent a few years bonding with you, and now they're going to spend you know, over a decade bonding with like all these total strangers who are going to teach them all this information about life and you know, what they're supposed to do with their life. And it disconnects them from their parents and from the families. And I think there's a lot of, you know, it might be absolutely well-intentioned, or the intention was just to create factory workers to improve the lives of families by having, you know, better employment. That might, you know, a noble cause, but all of these side effects that it's creating, we have to recognize, hey, these are not good. How far back on this can we go? How many of these can we fix and go back to the original way? Because that's so much better.
Yeah. No, I've sort of always thought that every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction, is the old saying. I guess the next portion of the education system is I've done a little bit of homework on Milton Friedman, the famous libertarian economist. Now he advocated for a voucher style system, which allowed, for example, one school to go, well, you know, we've got some great home economics and metalwork and car shop teachers here. Maybe we should focus schools on different vocations a little bit more, as opposed to just generalized indoctrination centers. Do you see any value in that concept in modern times? Obviously, he came out with that quite a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good start. Of course, ideally, it's not that great, because you're still forcing people to pay into a system. And if you happen to have a child, then you get some of that money back and you can take it and use it for their education. We shouldn't be paying for education that we're not using. If you know, people are concerned that, like, okay, if we don't have government pay for education, we're going to have a lot of people who they're not going to take their kids to school. They're going to be uneducated. They're going to be stupid. They're going to be a problem for society. That's not necessarily true. But, you know, when you consider all of the money that the people are going to save, everyone will be able to afford the school. Plus, I mean, you know, the government spends like somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 per year on each student. That's a lot of money. And if you consider that the cost of education is really a fraction of that, when you consider that you can homeschool your kids with a better program than a public school for, you know, just a few $100s a year, and you consider if you get rid of the school taxes that are in your property tax, you'd save thousands of dollars per year and replace it with just a couple hundred. I think we'd really be doing a lot better. And a lot of this comes from technology. When I talk about the expense of just a couple $100s, there are online education courses that are great for, you know, everyone from a 3-year-old up to college. You can really do this online, which is really great, because, you know, you used to have to buy books before. And now you can get a tablet and you can just download so much information without having to have, you know, print all this paper and create all these expensive books, which those books, by the way, are overpriced because of contracts that they have with the government and basically a monopoly that's in place, where every single book that, you know, you go to the bookstore and buy a book like that might cost you $30. The schools might be paying $100 to $200 per book. And especially when you get to college, it's the same kind of thing, except you're paying for it more directly. The cost of education is really, really, really inexpensive. We just think it's expensive because we look at how much money the government is spending on it, and they're just burning through it.
I question, you know, just how well they spend their money, as most libertarians do. And I guess from what you've just said, this coronavirus stuff really could be a great example as to just how non-useful these the current system, or the up till now current system, has been. I joked for the last few years, as a lot of people have done, I guess, online and wherever else, that, you know, the entire education system could be replaced by YouTube. And while that's probably an exaggerated version of, because the education should be in the home, in life, in your community, the actual technical side of it nowadays, you don't need to leave the house for it. So all this people locked in their houses and teaching their kids will be a fairly good example of that, I suspect. Now, I know you're strapped for time, but I've got at least one more key issue that I'd really love your opinion on. Now, when I did my little campaign and whatever, and I'd say, right, we need less taxes, drop the taxes, drop the taxes, drop the taxes. Well, how will we fund hospitals? You just want people to die. Now, obviously, my response was, listen, of course, we don't want people to die, but we want people to be able to opt in and opt out of the system. We want more liberty involved in how these things are funded, and we want them to run more efficiently and at a higher standard. I suspect is the direction I wanted to take the discussion. How about yourself?
Yes. So the thing we have to realize about taxes is, for every dollar you give to the government, 90% of that or more is going into some billionaire's pocket. Very, very little of that is spent on schools, roads, hospitals, police, and other things. Of course, military is a big one, especially in the United States, but that's mostly a waste because we're involved in wars that are basically benefiting corporations, stealing oil from other countries and all this other nonsense. A lot of the money that we give to the government is just absolutely wasted. The stuff that we want from government, hospitals, people think that the government pays for hospitals, and I'm not sure exactly how it is in Australia, but in the United States, yeah, the government has a couple of hospitals. Those are usually the worst hospitals. The private hospitals are the really good ones. And you have places where you have what's called a certificate of need. So basically, if some people have some money and they want to make some more money and they go to a city and say, hey, let's build a new hospital. There's enough people here that we need a new hospital. They have to go to the government and they have to prove that there's a need for a hospital. And if the government says, no, we don't think there's a need for a hospital, there's not going to be a new hospital. It doesn't matter that somebody has the money and wants to build it. Now, the problem with this is, of course, usually what happens is you've already got one hospital in this town and someone wants to build a second one. And so that one hospital makes very good friends with the politicians in town and says, make sure that nobody else builds a hospital so that we can be the only one, we can charge more. And that's ultimately what we have. And this is how monopolies are created and protected in the medical industry. The same thing happens with pharmaceuticals and everything else. So I don't want to get too far from that because we're talking about taxes, but government is the reason why our healthcare is so expensive and why there are so few doctors and hospitals and everything else. Stops and limits the creation of new doctors and hospitals and cures and everything else. When it comes to police, what are a lot of the police doing? Most of the police are charged with collecting revenue. They're not there to go door to door and say, oh, I heard there was a disturbance. Somebody called the police. In a lot of neighborhoods, if you call the police and say, hey, I have a problem at my house, they'll take a while to get there. Why? Because most of the police are patrolling the streets, looking for speeders, people who haven't paid their registration on their vehicles, those sorts of things. Stopping and looking for drugs on people, which nobody called the cops for that. And so when you call the cops, there's not that many people to send out to your home. That's a huge problem. And this is what you're paying for with your money.
Revenue raising as opposed to preventing actual crime.
Absolutely. And then of course it gives a false sense of security that, oh, the police are always going to be there. So I don't need to protect myself. I don't need a gun. I don't need to resolve my disputes. There was an example of, someone, a friend of mine was just telling me this story, that they have a goat in their yard and it's been getting out of their fence, and they have a neighbor who does a lot of like very, I guess extravagant gardening where they have plants and flowers and everything. And so my friend wanted to make sure the goat wasn't going to go eat the plants. And of course the other owner was very concerned about that also. Instead of the owner going over to her house and saying, hey, let's talk about this. I'm worried about your goat. I don't want it to eat my plants. Instead of him having the courage to say that himself, he called the police to go out there. And so that's tax money. That's what's being spent. It's not being spent to stop real crimes. It's being spent to stop that. Now, the goat didn't destroy the plants, and she already had plans to build a fence, and she would have told him that if he would have just come over to have a conversation. But that's the world that we live in, where people are willing to call the cops for every little thing instead of reserving that for when there's an actual crime or a threat of a crime. We absolutely waste our resources on that, and that all costs money. But when it's free, like it's free to dial 911 because we've already paid for it with taxes, then people will absolutely abuse that system. And of course, sometimes that turns really bad. Sometimes the police show up. There have been people who called the police because they're having a disturbance within their own family. Sometimes there's somebody who's mentally ill, and the police show up and they end up killing somebody. Because they called the police because it's free to deal with something that's not a crime. And the police are they're trained. A lot of them are ex-military in the U.S. They're trained to, diffuse a situation by killing somebody or injuring them. So it's a very difficult situation that we live in. But ultimately, like, we have to understand that everything that we want from the government, we could still have. And yes, we might have to pay for it, but if we had to pay for those things directly instead of paying taxes, we'd actually get a whole lot more, and we'd have a whole lot of money left over.
You get more value for money, and you can pick and choose the things, the services, and the options that you want to use.
Instead of one school, you have a choice between multiple. Instead of one hospital, you have a choice between multiple, and one might be better than the other, like you said. And that's the beautiful thing about having that freedom of choice and options.
Well, and it encourages the schools and the hospitals and everybody else to perform at a higher level if they want to acquire the custom or the turnover from the population. Oh, well, that hospital, I'm not going to that one. They do a really crappy job. I'll drive the extra, kilometre, 2 kilometres, 5 kilometres, whatever the case may be, to go to what I consider a better hospital, which is sort of the spirit of competition. And look, and a lot of this in my head too is it's a matter of giving people the autonomy to go back to having some self-responsibility. They tend to, the government has sort of infantilized. Certainly our government works at it. Yours, we're very similar countries. They seem to take away that entrepreneurial spirit. They take away that self-reliance in some cases, which to me that's probably the ultimate crime these people do, is they make you reliant on them. They'll break your legs and then sell you some crutches and tax you for using the crutches. Thank you very much. Aren't we so good to you? That's always been a bit of a bugbear for me. But well, Dan, I know you've given me an hour, which is fantastic, which I really appreciate. I know the audience that's growing for Resolute TV are going to find you very, very interesting. So hopefully we can generate a lot more interest in your campaign. What's the status of your campaign? How long's it got to run? What have you still got to do? Obviously, there's a lot of work involved, and I don't know how many American supporters we'll get watching this, but why should people vote for Dan Taxation as Theft Behrman?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a long way to go. There was a convention scheduled for the middle of May where the nominee would be decided. So right now we're basically running a primary. And when the nominee is selected, it doesn't really happen through the actual votes. It happens through a convention process. And that process, of course, is being threatened by the coronavirus. So we're not exactly sure what's going to happen at this point. But at some point, we're going to figure it out. Someone's going to get the nomination. It might be past May. But that's really what we're working for right now. And so that's a process of working with delegates and getting our information about our campaign out to delegates to make sure that we can win that. Ultimately, for me, this is a long-term project. Whether we win or lose, this is something that has turned into a worldwide grassroots movement. Like I said, we've got support from every continent on the world, and we've got support from every continent in the world, and which is amazing because this is translating into different languages. We're really inspiring people around the world to want freedom, to understand what freedom is, and to understand that we can all have better lives. I visited Uganda, which was amazing to see. We always hear about how Africa is such an impoverished nation, but they've got so many resources there. And when I went there and I actually talked to people and figured out how things work, it's really easy to see that the reason people are in poverty is because the government is forcing them that way. They're basically the leaders of that country are making millions of dollars extracting, having foreign nationals come in, extracting the resources and selling it to them. Meanwhile, the people are being forced to be treated like slaves and pushed into shanty towns and everything else. It's really terrible how they're treating people, but these people are starting to rise up. They're starting to understand what freedom is about. They're starting to realize, hey, we need to take care of ourselves. And they're improving themselves in every way, learning to farm, learning to build businesses and everything else. People who have been treated, as almost like slave labor in the past. So it's really amazing to see that. And I really want this to spread. And what's really interesting is In some of the more developed nations, it's really hard for people to understand because, the government, our quality of life is so good. And we attribute that to the government. The government takes such good care of us, but really it's not that at all. It's the businesses and the corporations that we're living off of the fruit of their products. All the luxuries that they've created, the televisions, the clean drinking water, the electricity and everything else. This is all created by businesses, and we have governments that are actually preventing these goods from flowing to different parts of the world. So we have it really good, and it's really difficult for us to see how much the government is hurting us when we can all go back to our homes and snuggle up in our comfortable little beds and watch, whatever we're watching on Netflix. It's really hard for us to see that. But when you look at it objectively, when you start to see the government coming after you, coming after your children, for whatever reason, and taking things away from you and taking your money away from you. And when the economy stops and you realize, hey, my life is not as stable as I once thought it was, that's when people really start to see. And unfortunately, at that point, it's too late. So my job is ultimately, it's something that I'm probably going to be working on the rest of my life, is to wake people up to the reality of what the government is doing, how it's destructive, how it's violating our rights, and what we can do to change that.
Mate, I think that's a fantastic platform, and I really hope you do really, really well. And I'm always cheering for all libertarians in any capacity, even the ones that I don't agree with, heaven forbid. But I have a feeling that you and I would agree on plenty, and we do seem to agree on an awful lot. I really appreciate your time for this. This is a fledgling little project, so to
Absolutely.
have a 2020 presidential candidate on here is a real big coup for us. So we're really happy. I'll thank you for your time now, and ladies and gentlemen, if we can get on and support Dan Taxationist Theft Behrman, have you got websites you want to let people know about where they can contact you, support you, encourage you, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so my website is Behrman2020.com. And if you go there, I've got links to all of the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. YouTube has a lot of really great informational videos on there. It's also got a podcast where I interview a lot of other libertarians and talk specifically about all kinds of issues like healthcare and education, and just freedom in general. So there's some really great information there. And just on the website, there's a lot of the different policies that everyone can check out. And of course, I'm really easy to contact. So if you want to contact me through the website, you can do that. And I respond to just about every email.
Well, that's fantastic. Not everybody can say that.